perhaps a bit later in the day. Thought it would be a good time to review the case for and against employee ownership. As I mentioned earlier, since the Industrial Revolution, people have written extensively on this issue. I have a note in my notes to say there's a good quote from J.S. Mill, but I'm not sure where I'll put it. I'll have to forego that just at the moment. In terms of rights, there's an argument that employee ownership provides a governance structure that distributes reward and control to the key risk bearer in firms, those risk bearers being employees. Risk bearers because they invest their human capital in the firm, they can't readily diversify it, they should have a right to rewards and control for assuming this degree of risk. Another argument comes from political science, and it's simply that as we have democratic rights in our lives, this should extend also to work and employment, that employees should have full democratic rights at work. There's an efficiency argument that if you align the interests of employees with those of the company, this will lead to greater motivation, employee engagement and commitment. And this in turn should lead to lower absenteeism, lower turnover, people working harder and smarter. And then in turn, this should lead to better company performance. A social argument that firms controlled by their employees will attach greater importance to employee health and well-being, and indeed other stakeholder interests. There's also a very interesting argument, which David Erdl, who's with us tonight, has dealt with, that employee ownership could be better for public health. And the argument here is that many illnesses are the result of stress. Stress is usually the result of a lack of control. Employees in control, ergo, should have better health. What David did was compare communities with extensive employee ownership with those that didn't. And some of you may have seen a recent book by our colleagues Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson, The Spirit Level, a bit of a bestseller at the moment, where they look at the health benefits of employee ownership. There's another political science argument that if you encourage people to participate at work, they'll carry that out into the broader polity. They'll become more involved in their communities. I'm not going to deal with this, but I should say that the evidence is not very supportive of that. And then finally, back in the Thatcher era, key policy makers thought it would imbue workers with the entrepreneurial spirit and weaken their attachment to trade unions. Not sure whether it did that. Okay, let's look at the argument against. It's argued it infringes managers' right to manage, having all these workers getting involved in decision-making and ownership. It's argued that it's an inefficient form of risk-bearing because the key risk is borne by people who tend to be risk-averse, are undiversified investors, and usually have credit and wealth constraints. In other words, the workforce. It's argued that as a result that firms with employee ownership can often be undercapitalised, and also that few are creative. It's also argued that involving more of the workforce in decision making will lead to slower and poorer quality decisions. And that's likely to be especially a problem where there is a very diverse workforce, where you have to reconcile the possibly competing interests of the various employee groups. There is an argument that there is a horizon problem, that employee owners will prefer current consumption, i.e. they'll take the opportunity to pay themselves higher wages rather than investing in the firm. A counter-argument is that they may self-exploit. They pay lower wages, work longer hours, and have poor health and safety. There is a little bit of evidence that suggests that health and safety might be worse in employee-owned firms. So a common argument has been that whilst employee ownership might be nice in theory, it's difficult to do in practice, and that there are few employee-owned firms because it's not a practical form of organisation. Now, let me emphasise something here. These arguments apply and have been developed primarily in relation to my second form of employee ownership, workers' cooperatives. I argue that by and large they don't apply to anything like the same degree to the employee-owned firms that I'm interested in.